Hello, I'm the Animal Health Officer, and today I will be talking about the Ebola virus disease in animals. Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, they ask three main questions. One, what is the likelihood for humans to be exposed to the Ebola virus through close contact with wild animal species within regions currently affected with Ebola virus in Africa? Two, what is the likelihood for humans to be exposed to the Ebola virus through close contact with domestic mammalian species in areas of Africa where the Ebola virus is present? And three, what is the likelihood of the Ebola virus spreading to an unaffected country through movement of meat from the wild animals originating from Ebola virus suitable in affected African countries? Today, I'm going to really focus on these three main questions in helping the control and prevention of the Ebola virus. We're going to specifically talk about how we can combat transmission between wild and domestic animals to humans, as well as how we can combat the movement of meat out of affected areas into non-affected areas, and how that will help the transmission of the Ebola virus, human or animal to human. So this is just a little overview of the Ebola transmission. It's important that we understand this transmission, because as we move forward, we're going to try to break down this transmission so we can really focus on the control and prevention of Ebola. So the Ebola virus, as we know, is for the most part is a zoonotic disease. Zoonotic diseases mainly means animals and humans. The animal factor in the Ebola virus is very important, and there's still much to be understood. As you can see here, evidence has shown that bats are the natural reservoir. Bats can transmit it to themselves, but bats can also transmit it to primates and to like gorillas, apes, but also antelopes. But also this transmission ring can have a spillover effect into humans, and then humans can transmit it to humans via tradition. In Africa, they had traditional funeral practices, but they came in contact with bodily fluids. Also, healthcare workers who were not properly gowned came in contact with ill people. And then also, just family members came in contact with the virus because they were in contact with blood and bodily fluids. We're going to focus on this part of the transmission because this part of the transmission has come to seem that it's a rare cause, but it's also a primary cause for the spillover effect into humans. So I feel like if we really focus on, let's understand and really come to terms with how does the Ebola virus naturally progress in these animals, and does that affect how it can be transmitted? The role of animals play in transmission. The Ebola virus was first discovered in 1976 near the Ebola River, which is how it's got its name, in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. At that time, and it's still today, it's believed that Ebola virus is animal-borne, with bats, the fruit bat, being the most likely source, according to the CDC. But the thing about bats, and that we really need to understand more about, and that will help with the control and prevention, is that these bats, they don't show any clinical signs, they don't show any symptoms, they're basically unsymptomatic, but they shed the virus, and they can shed the virus dead or alive. And that's how, and we'll go on to talk about them shedding it and how humans can get it. But first, since we know that these bats can harbor this disease, and we know that it can be transmitted through their bodily fluids to humans, much research today postulates that bats are the key animals that is the natural host for the Ebola virus. But we need to confirm this. In 2019, scientists found evidence of the Ebola virus within a species of bat in Liberia without any known human cases. This was the first time a bat was found to have the virus in West Africa. This was super important and super big, and still is very critical. Scientists found genetic material from the virus, and they found Ebola virus antibodies in this greater long-fingered bat in Liberia's northeastern Nubia district. So this tells us that bat that bats could be a natural host. So I feel the next steps that need to occur with this is we need to understand this, and we need to characterize which species does this occur in. So I want to enlist a group of scientists to track how the bats migrate, how they move around, and tag them. And by tagging them, we can see this migratory pattern, and also we can periodically test them to see if they're exposed. And I feel like we need to track multiple different species of bats just to see, do certain bats amount to response differently than other bats. In doing so, we could potentially see the migratory pattern of the disease from a zoonotic perspective. We really need to understand how the natural life cycle within the bats. We really need to understand how long are they infected. Is there an infection period? Is there an incubation period? Are they only infected for a week and then that's it? But also, how do they migrate? And where are they migrating? Does the deforestation and hunting play a role in their migratory pattern? So these are all things that need to be investigated a little bit further, because they will help us in controlling, one, and prevention. Because if we can understand the natural life cycle, we know that the incubation period is 3 days and the actual shedding of the virus is a week. This can help us in transmission. Now, the next thing, as the FAOA also postulated, was the meat transmission. So what is bushmeat? Bushmeat, also known as raw or minimally processed meat that comes from wild animals in certain regions of the world, including Africa, it poses a risk for communicable diseases. Monkeys and bats are a common source of bushmeat in countries in Africa. Bushmeat can be smoked, dried, or salted. There's other ways to prepare it, but these ways have shown that these procedures are not sufficient to cause these meat to be infectious. So when assessing the risk of animal transmission, wild animals such as the fruit bat, which are a source of, which are bushmeat, for many people, is a hazard and a high risk. Currently, the FAO recommends that people in the affected and at-risk areas not hunt or dress or eat bats. But just because you recommend something doesn't mean it occurs. So there's much evidence to show that meat can be transmitted. Domestic and wild animals are illegally transmitted from Africa to Europe or the United States. The United States currently has a ban, and they ban the transmission of this illegal meat into their country, and they fine people who bring it in $250,000 if they bring it into the United States. And this needs to constantly go worldwide, because this disease, even though it's pandemic in just Africa and certain areas, they term it an epidemic. It needs to be seen that Ebola is a high risk with movement of meat. So in the context of 2014 Western Africa outbreaks, activities like hunting, trading, and consuming meat from wild animals has been banned in infected countries, but it needs to be banned continent-wide. Other West African countries, because we need to prevent that wildlife to human spillover effect. If we can prevent those events from happening, that movement of the meat, I think it will really help us in controlling this disease. I want to implement regulations, tighter control regulations and bans, not just in the infected zones, but also in the uninfected zones, because it's still being moved with these bans. So it's not doing enough to control this disease. So we need to make sure that the public health within the entire continent of Africa, and even in the United States and the European European nations, we need to really put a ban on wild meat transportation between these continents and between countries. So a similar penalty with worldwide needs to be set, not just like the United States. It needs to be set worldwide so people understand that this is a serious disease, this is a serious way of transmission, and this is a easy way to control and prevent this disease. And it's an easy way to monitor the disease. If we find that we decrease the transportation of wild and domestic meat from Africa and from affected areas, and the transmission rate goes down, the rate of disease goes down. We want to see, is there a strong correlation between the two? Just like is there a strong correlation between us tracking these bats, tagging these bats, and understanding how this plays a role in the Ebola virus. I think these two things, just like the FAOA said, scripted in those 3 questions we spoke about at the beginning, these two things, regulating hunting, and also really understanding the bat transmission, the life cycle within the bat, is really going to help us in control and prevention. These are my references. Thank you.